The static crackled over the radio transmission. Dr. Elena Rodriguez held her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the console. The signal from Perseverance 9 was weak, almost non-existent, but it was there. After 6 minutes and 23 seconds of radio silence, the rover had finally responded. "We've got something," she whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might somehow break the tenuous connections stretching across millions of miles of empty space. The mission control room at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory fell silent. 30 of the world's brightest minds stopped what they were doing, all eyes turning toward the main screen where data was now streaming in from the red planet. It was July 17, 2028, and humanity was about to change forever. "The readings can't be right," muttered Dr. Chen, adjusting his glasses as he scrolled through the numbers. "Run it again." Elena shook her head. "We've run it 3 times already. The data is consistent." She pulled up the ground-penetrating radar images on the main display. "Look at this. These aren't small pockets of frozen water. This is an entire network." The images showed what appeared to be vast underground channels spreading out like veins beneath the Martian surface. The preliminary calculations suggested these reservoirs contained enough water to fill Lake Michigan several times over. "How did we miss this?" Director Thompson asked, his voice betraying a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "We've been sending rovers and orbiters to Mars for decades." "Because we've been looking in the wrong places," Elena explained, bringing up a topographical map. Everyone focused on the poles or ancient riverbeds. But these water reserves are deep, really deep. It took the new XR-7 drill on Perseverance 9 to detect them. The room buzzed with excited chatter as the implications began to sink in. Water meant life, or at least the possibility of it. Water meant sustainable colonies. Water meant fuel production. Water meant everything. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Within hours of NASA's press conference, social media exploded with speculation, memes, and passionate debates. Space enthusiasts celebrated while skeptics demanded more evidence. Religious leaders contemplated the theological implications, and politicians jockeyed to align themselves with what was quickly becoming the scientific discovery of the century. In Houston, retired astronaut Commander Thomas Walker watched the announcement from his living room, a forgotten cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. At 62, he had long accepted that his spacefaring days were behind him. He had walked on the moon during the Artemis missions in his youth, but Mars had always remained tantalizingly out of reach. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he hadn't seen in years. "Tom," said the voice of NASA Administrator Wendy Blackwell, "how quickly can you get back into training shape?" 6 months later, the preparations for humanity's first crewed mission to Mars were proceeding at a breakneck pace. What had once been projected as a 2040s endeavor was now fast-tracked for 2030. International cooperation flourished as rival space agencies united behind a common goal. Even private aerospace companies set aside competition to contribute technology and resources. The newly expanded astronaut training facility in Arizona, Commander Walker led a team of 12 specialists through grueling simulations. They practiced drilling operations in Mars analog terrain, tested experimental water extraction equipment, and spent weeks at a time in a sealed habitat that mirrored their future Martian home. "The water changes everything," Walker explained to a group of reporters during a rare media day. "It's not just about planting a flag anymore. We're talking about the first permanent human presence on another planet." What he didn't tell them, what only a handful of people knew, was that the water reserves weren't the only thing Perseverance 9 had discovered. In a secured lab beneath NASA headquarters, Dr. Rodriguez and a small team of exobiologists worked around the clock, analyzing samples from the deepest drill site. The microscopic structures they found defied conventional explanation. They weren't quite fossils, but they weren't quite not fossils either. "Whatever they are," Elena told Director Thompson during a classified briefing, "they appear to be responding to our testing environment. These structures are changing." Thompson's face paled. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to be extremely careful about what we're bringing back to Earth," she replied. "And we need to be even more careful about what we might encounter when we drill deeper." As launch day approached, the 12 astronauts selected for the Mars mission became global celebrities. Children dressed as them for Halloween. Their faces appeared on magazine covers and commemorative coins. The world watched their every move with a mixture of hope and pride. But during the nights, alone in his quarters, Commander Walker often found himself staring at the classified photos from the deep drill samples. In his 30-year career with NASA, he had prepared for countless contingencies, mechanical failures, solar flares, medical emergencies in space. But nothing had prepared him for the possibility that the greatest discovery in human history might also be its greatest threat. And as the countdown to launch began, one question kept him awake at night. What exactly was waiting for them beneath the surface of Mars? The massive rocket stood gleaming in the early morning light at Kennedy Space Center, vapor clouds rolling off its cryogenic fuel tanks. In just 72 hours, Commander Walker and his crew would depart on humanity's most ambitious journey. But first, there was the matter of the final briefing. Walker entered the secure conference room to find Elena already there, surrounded by stacks of reports and 3 empty coffee cups. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "When was the last time you slept?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. She shrugged. "Tuesday, maybe? The samples keep. I don't know how to explain it. They're inconsistent." "Inconsistent how?" Elena pulled up a series of microscopic images on her tablet. These were taken 12 hours apart. Same sample, same conditions. She slid the tablet toward him. "They're reorganizing themselves at the molecular level." Walker studied the images, feeling a chill despite the room's warmth. The microscopic structures had indeed changed, shifting from what looked like simple crystalline formations to something more complex, with what almost appeared to be cellular walls. "Have you shared this with the rest of the team?" Elena shook her head. "Director Thompson thinks we should keep this compartmentalized until we know more. The last thing we need is public panic right before launch." Walker frowned. "The crew has a right to know what they might be dealing with." "And tell them what exactly? That we might have found Martian microbes that evolve in real time? We don't even know if these structures are biological." Our conversation was interrupted as the rest of the mission specialists filed into the room. Dr. Patel, their exobiologist. Lieutenant Rivera, security and operations. Dr. Okonkwo, their geological expert. And 8 others, each the best in their field, each unaware of what the deep drill samples had revealed. Director Thompson began the briefing with practiced optimism, reviewing mission parameters and contingency plans. But when he opened the floor for questions, Lieutenant Rivera spoke up. "Sir, there are rumors about anomalies in the drill samples. Is there something we should know?" Thompson's expression remained neutral, but Walker noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped the podium. "All relevant mission data has been included in your briefings, Lieutenant." The answer was technically true but deliberately evasive. Walker caught Elena's eye across the room. Her slight headshake was clear. "Don't say anything." "Not yet." After the briefing, Walker retreated to the astronaut quarters where his daughter Lily waited. At 16, she had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. She'd flown in from Chicago for these final days before launch. "You're worried about something," she said as they walked along the beach near the Space Center. It wasn't a question, Walker smiled. She'd always been perceptive. Just pre-launch jitters. "Dad, I've seen you before missions. This is different." He stopped, watching the waves crash against the shore. How much could he tell her? How much should he? "The Mars mission is complicated," he finally said. "We're going farther than humans have ever gone, staying longer than we've ever stayed. There are unknowns." "The water isn't just water, is it?" Lily asked quietly. Walker looked at her sharply. "What have you heard?" "Nothing specific. But people are talking. The way NASA fast-tracked everything. The closed-door meetings. Something big is happening, bigger than just finding water." Before Walker could respond, his secure phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "Lab. Emergency." Across the complex, in the underground laboratory, Elena and Dr. Patel worked frantically to contain what was happening inside the sealed chamber. The sample, less than a gram of Martian sediment from the deepest drill site, had somehow corroded through its first containment vessel. "It's impossible," Patel muttered, adjusting the robotic arms to move the sample into a more secure container. "This material isn't corrosive under any known terrestrial standard." "Well, it's not terrestrial, is it?" Elena replied, monitoring the atmospheric readings inside the chamber for contamination. When Walker arrived, Thompson was already there, his face ashen. "Talk to me," he demanded. Elena gestured toward the sample. "It's consuming materials, glass, certain metals, polymers, and using them to grow." "Grow," Walker repeated. "So it is biological." "We don't know," Patel said. "It doesn't follow any biological pattern we recognize. It doesn't need oxygen or any conventional nutrient source. It just adapts to whatever environment it finds itself in." Thompson paced the length of the observation window. "Options? We suspend the mission," Elena said immediately, "until we understand what we're dealing with." "Absolutely not," Thompson replied. "Do you have any idea what's at stake? The international partnerships, the funding, the political capital. We are 3 days from launch. And we're also potentially 3 days from sending humans to interact with something we don't understand," Elena countered, her voice rising. Walker stepped between them. "What if we modify the mission? Focus on remote observation of these sites before any direct interaction." As they debated, none of them noticed the almost imperceptible hairline fracture forming on the second containment vessel, or the microscopic particles escaping into the laboratory's air filtration system. Launch day arrived with a perfect blue sky, the kind of weather that mission controllers dream about. The world watched as the 12 astronauts emerged from the crew quarters in their flight suits, waving to the assembled crowd before boarding the transport to the launch pad. Commander Walker led the procession, his face a mask of calm professionalism that betrayed none of the turmoil within. Elena sat in mission control, her eyes fixed on the biomonitor readings from the lab. For the past 48 hours, she and Patel had worked non-stop to secure the compromised sample, but something still didn't add up. The environmental sensors were picking up anomalies that shouldn't be there, minute fluctuations in temperature and air composition that followed no discernible pattern. "T-minus 60 minutes and counting," announced the flight director. The room hummed with focused energy as technicians ran through final checks. Elena's phone vibrated. A text from Dr. Patel, lab computer showing unexplained data usage spikes. System diagnostics finding nothing. Could be related to sample behavior. A cold weight settled in her stomach. She glanced up at the main screen where the rocket stood ready, 12 human lives strapped inside it, preparing to journey to a planet where something waited. Something that could apparently adapt, consume materials, and now, possibly, interface with electronic systems. "Director," she said quietly, approaching Thompson at his station. "We need to talk. Now." In the crew cabin of the Mars Colonial Transport Vehicle, Walker ran through the pre-launch checklist with Lieutenant Rivera beside him. The rest of the crew were secured in their acceleration couches, monitoring their respective systems. "Life support nominal," reported Dr. Olivia Chin, their environmental specialist. "All crew vitals normal." Walker acknowledged with a nod, but something caught his attention on Chen's medical display. "What's that irregularity in your heart rate?" Chen frowned, looking down at her biometrics. "That's odd. I feel fine." "It's showing up on mine too," Rivera said, showing his own monitor. A strange, stuttering pattern appeared in the heartbeat readout, unlike anything Walker had seen before. Walker's secure comm unit buzzed. "Command override, authorization Thompson Delta 9, came the director's voice. "Initiate cabin air sampling Protocol 7. Walker exchanged glances with Rivera. Protocol 7 was designed for detecting biological contaminants. Without explanation, he retrieved the emergency sampling kit from beneath his seat and activated it. Back in mission control, Elena was pulling up the lab's security footage from the past 3 days. "There," she said, pointing to a nearly imperceptible haze around the ventilation duct at 2:17 hours. The particulate matter escaped containment. It's been in the facility's air system for almost 3 days. "That's impossible," Thompson said. The filters did catch most of it," Elena interrupted. But look at this. She switched to the most recent microscopy images. What was captured in the filters has changed composition. It's become smaller, almost nanoscale. Small enough to bypass secondary filtering. Are you suggesting this material is intelligent? Thompson asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'm suggesting it adapts with incredible speed to overcome obstacles, Elena replied. And if it's in the air system, it could be anywhere in the facility, Thompson finished, the color draining from his face. Including medical processing, suit preparation, food services, Elena listed. Anywhere the astronauts were during the past 72 hours. On the launch pad, the first anomaly appeared in the vehicle's computer systems. Minor at first, a fluctuation in the telemetry data, a momentary glitch in the backup life support monitoring. Nothing that would trigger an abort. T-minus 30 minutes, came the announcement that Walker's sampling device beeped completion. The display showed results that made no sense, unknown molecular structures present in the cabin air, structures that shared some characteristics with the deep drill samples from Mars. Control, this is Walker, he said into his comm, we're showing contamination in the cabin environment. Request immediate guidance. There was a pause, longer than protocol would dictate. Stand by, Commander, came the eventual reply that I end the sterile white hallway outside Mission Control. Elena confronted Thompson with the evidence compiled on her tablet. It's in the transport vehicle. We have to abort. Do you understand what you're asking? Thompson hissed. The political fallout, the funding implications, I'm asking you to save 12 lives, Elena cut in. Whatever this is, it's spreading, adapting, and we have no idea what it wants or what it might do once it reaches Mars. Thompson stared at her for a long moment. What it wants, he repeated slowly. You're anthropomorphizing an unknown substance. Maybe, Elena admitted. Or maybe I'm recognizing a pattern that we're too afraid to acknowledge. Look at these network usage spikes, the way it's interacting with electronic systems. This isn't random behavior. In the transport vehicle, the anomalies were multiplying. 3 more crew members reported the same strange heart rhythm. The navigation computer rebooted twice without explanation. And most disturbing of all, the communication system began picking up a signal, faint but persistent, that matched no known protocol. Command, we are experiencing multiple system irregularities, Walker reported, keeping his voice steady for the crew's benefit. Request immediate launch hold and emergency protocols. The answer came back fragmented, breaking up with interference. Continue, launch window, priority 1. Walker made a decision. Lieutenant Rivera, initiate emergency egress procedures. Rivera looked shocked. Sir, we don't have abort orders. I'm giving the order, Walker said firmly. Something is wrong with this vehicle, and I'm not risking my crew. As Rivera reluctantly began the sequence, the cabin lights flickered. The control panels across the command console lit up with warning indicators, systems activating and deactivating seemingly at random, and then, most chillingly, words appeared on the main display screen, words that had not been input by any human hand. Return. Home.in Mission Control. Chaos erupted as systems began failing across the board. The main screens showed critical warnings from the transport vehicle's life support, propulsion, and communication systems. What's happening? Thompson demanded, watching technicians frantically working their stations. Elena stared at her tablet, which was now displaying the same message that had appeared in the transport vehicle. I think, she said quietly, we're no longer alone in our own systems. Outside, dark clouds suddenly gathered over Kennedy Space Center, though no storms had been forecast. As lightning split the sky, the massive rocket on the launch pad began its automated launch sequence. Without authorization from Mission Control, the ground trembled as the massive rocket's engines ignited without authorization. Klaxons blared throughout Kennedy Space Center, emergency protocols activating across the facility. Inside Mission Control, screens flashed red with abort warnings. Override the launch sequence. Thompson shouted, his composure finally cracking. We can't, a flight engineer replied, fingers flying across his keyboard. The system isn't responding to commands. It's like something else has control. Elena grabbed the emergency communication line. Commander Walker, do you copy? The launch sequence has been compromised. Initiate manual override, code Epsilon 7 Delta. Inside the transport vehicle, Walker and Rivera fought to regain control as G-forces began pressing them into their seats. The manual override switches were unresponsive, locked in position by some unseen force. Controls aren't responding, Walker reported, his voice straining as acceleration increased. We're locked out of all systems. Dr. Chen's medical monitor began emitting a high-pitched alarm. Commander, she called out, her voice tinged with fear. Something's happening to my heartbeat. It's synchronizing with the launch sequence countdown. Walker glanced at Chen's biometrics display and felt ice form in his veins. Her heartbeat was indeed pulsing in perfect rhythm with the countdown timer. Impossible by any medical standard. Looking around, he saw the same pattern appearing on other crew members' monitors. Mission Control, we have a biological situation, Walker reported. Unknown influence affecting crew physiology. The radio crackled with static before Elena's voice broke through. Commander, we believe the Martian sample has evolved. It's not just material anymore. It appears to be some kind of network. A distributed intelligence using both electronic systems and biological hosts. As the rocket cleared the tower, accelerating into the clouds, the main navigation screen flickered again. The message changed. Return. Mars. Walker stared at the words. It wants to go to Mars, he whispered in that moment. A memory surfaced, something from the classified briefing files he'd studied. The deepest drill samples hadn't just contained water and unknown particles. They had found traces of an ancient structure buried kilometers beneath the surface. The information had been deemed too speculative, too extraordinary to include in the public announcement. Elena, the structure in the deep core samples, was there any indication it was artificial? He asked over the secure channel. The radio fell silent for several seconds. Then Elena's voice returned, lower now. How did you know about that? I need to know. Yes, she finally admitted. The geometric patterns were too precise to be natural formations. Some team members theorized it might be ruins. The implications hit Walker like a physical blow. Not just microscopic life, but evidence of an ancient civilization on Mars. And now, whatever remnant of that civilization had survived in the deep water reserves was heading home. Using them as its transport in mission control, Elena watched in horror as every screen suddenly went dark, then relit with the same message now seen in the spacecraft. Return. Mars. It's an Arent. IR network, she whispered. Before Thompson could respond, the main doors to mission control burst open. A security team rushed in, led by a grim-faced official Elena had never seen before. General Davis, National Security Council, the man announced, flashing credentials. This facility is now under emergency quarantine protocols by presidential order. Thompson stepped forward. What are you talking about? We have a spacecraft with 12 astronauts aboard that just launched without authorization. We're aware. General Davis cut him off. And we know why. He turned to Elena. Dr. Rodriguez, you're needed at a secure facility. Your expertise on the Martian samples is critical. I'm not going anywhere, Elena insisted. I need to stay in communication with the crew. The general's expression hardened. This isn't a request, Doctor. What we're dealing with goes far beyond NASA. We've been monitoring similar anomalies at research stations across the globe for the past 17 hours. This new information struck her like a physical blow. What do you mean across the globe? Weather patterns changing without meteorological explanation. Power grids experiencing unexplained surges. And most concerning, individuals reporting unusual neurological symptoms after coming into contact with water sources. Water sources? Elena repeated, the pieces falling into place. The Martian water samples, we distributed them to multiple research facilities. Precisely, the general confirmed. Whatever was dormant in that Martian water isn't dormant anymore. And it's spreading. Meanwhile, 200 miles above Earth and accelerating, the Mars colonial transport vehicle had fallen completely silent to outside communication. Inside, the 12 crew members watched in a mixture of awe and terror as their bodies began to change. Fine, silvery lines appeared beneath their skin, tracing patterns that resembled circuit boards. Their vision shifted, allowing them to perceive wavelengths beyond normal human perception. And most disturbing of all, they began to share thoughts, not through words, but through direct neural connection. Walker could feel the others in his mind now, their consciousness brushing against his own. But there was something else there too, something ancient and vast and patient. Something that had waited beneath the Martian surface for millions of years, preserved in the deep water reserves, waiting for a chance to return home. "It's not trying to harm us," Dr. Patel said softly, staring at the silvery patterns spreading across his hands. "It's changing us. Making us suitable." "Suitable for what?" Lieutenant Rivera demanded, fighting against the transformation with every ounce of his military discipline. Dr. Chen's eyes widened as understanding flooded through her. "Suitable for Mars. It's adapting our biology to survive there." Walker felt a presence focus on him specifically, probing his memories, his knowledge of the mission. In his mind, images formed, not of the Mars they had planned to visit, with its small research habitat and limited exploration range, but of vast underground cities, thriving with life and technology beyond human comprehension. Back on Earth, Elena was escorted to a heavily secured underground facility beneath the Nevada desert. There, on dozens of screens, she saw satellite imagery of something impossible, the oceans beginning to glow with the same bioluminescent patterns they had observed in the Martian samples. "It's not just in our networks," said a scientist she didn't recognize. "It's in Earth's water system now. The oceans, rivers, groundwater, all showing the same molecular changes as the Martian samples." General Davis's voice was grim. "We're looking at a planetary-scale event, Dr. Rodriguez. And our only link to understanding it is currently accelerating toward Mars with 12 infected astronauts aboard." Elena stared at the screens, a terrible realization dawning. "It's not an infection," she whispered. "It's a reconnection. Whatever this is, it didn't originate on Mars." "What are you saying?" the general demanded. Elena turned to face him, her expression grave. "I'm saying that what we found on Mars came from Earth originally. These aren't alien microbes." She pointed to ancient geological charts showing Earth and Mars billions of years ago. "They're our ancestors. And they've been waiting a very long time to come home." 3 weeks passed. The Mars colonial transport vehicle continued its trajectory toward the red planet, now completely silent to Earth's desperate communication attempts. Meanwhile, the transformation of Earth's water systems accelerated. Silvery patterns appeared in lakes, rivers, and oceans worldwide, creating vast networks visible from space. Panic gripped nations as people began showing the same changes observed in the astronauts: metallic traces beneath their skin, enhanced sensory perception, and most alarmingly, a shared consciousness that grew stronger each day. In the underground facility in Nevada, Elena worked tirelessly alongside an international team of scientists, analyzing data and searching for a way to slow or stop the spread. Dark circles rimmed her eyes. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch since the launch. "We've identified the mechanism," she announced during an emergency briefing with world leaders attending via secure video link. "It's a form of quantum entanglement. The particles in the Martian water are entangled with corresponding particles here on Earth. They've always been connected, across space and time." "How is that possible?" demanded the Chinese representative. "Such technology is beyond our current capabilities." "Because it isn't technology as we understand it," Elena explained. "It's evolved biology. These organisms evolved on early Earth billions of years ago, when Mars was still habitable. When Mars began losing its atmosphere, they found a way to survive by going dormant in the deep water reserves. But before they did, they seeded Earth with entangled particles, a way to eventually reconnect. And now they're what? Phoning home?" General Davis asked skeptically. "More like rebuilding the network," Elena corrected. "The particles recognize each other across planetary distances. And they're using us, our bodies, our technology, our water, to re-establish the connection. The Russian president leaned forward. So what happens when the astronauts reach Mars? Elena took a deep breath. We believe they'll activate whatever remains of the ancient infrastructure buried beneath the surface. They've become conduits. This is an invasion, the American president stated flatly. We need to consider all options to protect humanity. With respect, Madam President, Elena countered, if they wanted to harm us, they could have done so already. They've had access to our nuclear facilities, our power grids, our military systems, and they haven't weaponized any of it. I don't think this is an invasion. I think it's a reunion. On the transport vessel, now just days from Mars, Commander Walker had finally surrendered to the transformation. The silvery patterns covered his E-body now, and his consciousness had expanded to include not just his crew members but thousands of others back on Earth. Scientists, engineers, ordinary people who had come into contact with the transformed water, and beyond them all, he sensed the ancient intelligence guiding them, patient and purposeful. It communicated not in words but in concepts, memories, and emotions, showing Walker glimpses of Earth and Mars in their primordial states, teeming with similar life forms. We were one species, he whispered, understanding at last. Spread across two worlds. Until Mars began to die, Dr. Chen added, her consciousness now linked with his. They couldn't save everyone. So they preserved what they could and sent the rest here. We're not their descendants, Dr. Patel realized. We're their project. They've been guiding Earth's evolution from the beginning, through the water, waiting until we were advanced enough to bridge the gap between worlds again. Walker moved to the navigation controls, now operated not by touch but by thought alone. The ship responded instantly, adjusting course for the exact coordinates where Perseverance 9 had made its fateful discovery. Back on Earth, the Nevada facility's alarms blared as satellite data showed the Mars Colonial Transport Vehicle beginning its descent phase. They're landing, Elena announced. Exactly at the deep drill site. On screens around the world, billions watched the spacecraft's descent through the grainy images transmitted by Mars orbiters. The transport vessel touched down with impossible precision, its landing struts settling onto the rust-colored soil in perfect alignment with what appeared to be geometric patterns in the terrain that had never been visible before. The moment the ship touched down, Earth's transformed water systems pulsed with light in perfect synchronization. In the Nevada facility, equipment shorted out as power surged through the grid. When the systems came back online, every screen showed the same image. The Martian surface around the landing site beginning to change. What had appeared to be natural geological formations rearranged themselves, revealing the outlines of structures buried beneath millennia of dust storms. The ground around the lander split open in precise, geometric patterns, revealing a vast complex extending deep below the surface. It's a city, breathed Elena. An entire city. The astronauts emerged from their vessel, no longer needing spacesuits. Their transformed bodies adapted instantly to the thin atmosphere and harsh radiation. Commander Walker led them toward the opening in the surface, his movements confident and purposeful as they descended into the ancient complex, lights activated along pathways untouched for millions of years. Walker placed his hand on a crystalline panel, his transformed biology connecting instantly with the dormant systems. Information flooded his consciousness, not just data, but a living history. I understand now, he broadcast, his thoughts reaching Earth through the quantum entanglement. They never intended to replace us or control us. They need us to complete the cycle. In the Nevada facility, Elena watched in awe as images from Mars streamed directly to their screens, transmitted not by conventional signals but through the connected consciousness that now spanned two planets. What cycle? General Davis demanded. The answer came not from Elena but from the screens, where Commander Walker's transformed face appeared, his eyes reflecting starlight though he stood deep underground. Mars is dying, Walker explained, his voice oddly harmonic, as if multiple voices spoke through him. It has been for millions of years. But Earth is beginning to follow the same path. The ancient ones saw this coming. They experienced it before. They've been waiting for us to reach the technological level needed to revive Mars, so both planets can be saved. How? The American president asked. The water, Elena realized suddenly. The deep reserves on Mars aren't just water, they're a blueprint. A template for planetary restoration encoded at the molecular level. Walker nodded on screen. The transformation happening on Earth isn't random. It's preparing our planet's water systems to resist the same fate that befell Mars. And with the ancient technology here, we can reverse Mars' decline. The screens shifted to show the other astronauts activating different sections of the underground complex. Massive machinery, elegant in its alien design, hummed to life after eons of dormancy. This was their plan all along, Walker continued. 2 worlds, 1 species, saving each other. The transformation isn't about conquering humanity, it's about completing it. Reconnecting with the knowledge and abilities we were always meant to have. In the weeks that followed, the changes on both planets accelerated. On Mars, ancient atmospheric generators began the slow process of thickening the atmosphere. On Earth, the transformed water systems created a planetary network that regulated temperature and filtered toxins. The fear that had gripped humanity began to subside as it became clear the changes were beneficial. The transformed individuals, now numbering in the millions, became a bridge between ordinary humans and the ancient consciousness, explaining and guiding rather than forcing compliance. Elena stood at the shore of Lake Michigan, watching the silvery patterns swirl beneath its surface. The transformation had reached her too, but slowly, allowing her to maintain her distinct identity while connecting with the greater network. "We were never alone in the universe," she said to General Davis, who had come to find her. "We just didn't recognize our family when we found them." Davis, still untransformed, looked out over the water. "So what happens now? We just surrender our humanity to become part of this collective." "Not surrender," Elena corrected. "Expand. We're still human, just more than we were before. And we have 2 worlds now instead of 1. As the sun set over the lake, Elena's enhanced vision could just make out Mars rising in the evening sky, a small red that now held the other half of humanity's future. In his office at NASA headquarters, Director Thompson watched the latest transmissions from the Mars colony, which was expanding rapidly as more ships made the journey using the ancient technology's enhanced propulsion systems. The journey that had once taken months now required only days. He opened a secure file on his tablet. Data from the deepest drill sample, information that had been kept from the public and even from Elena and Walker. The final test results that had come in just hours after the launch. The ancient civilization on Mars hadn't died out naturally. Evidence in the geological record showed a deliberate shutdown, a controlled dormancy. They hadn't been fleeing extinction, they had been executing a plan spanning millions of years, and buried in the genetic code of the transformed water was something else, a map. Not of Mars or Earth, but of stars beyond our solar system. Other worlds where the same patterns might be waiting, dormant, and patient. Thompson closed the file and looked up at the night sky. Walker and the others believed they understood the full plan, that this was about saving 2 worlds. But the truth was far grander and perhaps more troubling. This wasn't the end of the transformation. It was just the first step. 6 months after the activation of the Martian complex, humanity stood at the threshold of a new era. The transformation had spread to roughly 30% of Earth's population, creating not the mindless collective some had feared, but rather a connected community that maintained individual identity while sharing knowledge and purpose. Director Thompson sat alone in his office, the star map file open on his desk. He had shared its contents with only a select few, Elena, Walker, and a small council of world leaders. The decision of when to reveal the full scope of what awaited humanity among the stars would come later. For now, people needed time to adjust to the new reality of a 2-planet civilization. His secure phone rang. Elena's voice came through, clear despite her location on the Martian surface. "The first terraforming phase is complete," she reported. "The atmospheric generators have increased pressure by 6% already. At this rate, we'll have breathable air within 15 years instead of the centuries we originally projected." "And the water expansion?" Thompson asked. "The deep reserves are being pumped to the surface through the ancient infrastructure. We've created the first open lake on Mars in millions of years. It's beautiful, Director. Thompson smiled despite himself. For all his concerns about the grand plan hidden in the star map, he couldn't deny the wonder of what was happening. How's Walker? Thriving. The connection between him and the ancient systems grows stronger each day. He's deciphering historical records now, their art, literature, scientific knowledge. It's like uncovering the missing chapters of our own history. After ending the call, Thompson stepped to the window overlooking the Washington Mall. The reflecting pool shimmered with the now familiar silvery patterns, a sight once met with terror but now accepted as part of daily life. Children played along its edges, some showing the telltale signs of transformation, others still unchanged. They played together without distinction or feared on Mars. Commander Walker stood at the edge of the newly formed lake, its surface reflecting the pink Martian sky. Dr. Chen and Lieutenant Rivera worked nearby, adjusting sensors that monitored the water's expansion. In the distance, the outlines of the first permanent surface structures took shape, a city rising from the ancient foundations. It still doesn't make sense, Rivera said, joining Walker at the lakeside. Why wait millions of years? Why not just maintain the civilization they had here? Walker smiled. The lieutenant remained the most skeptical among them, transformed physically but still questioning the ancient consciousness that guided them. Walker respected that. It kept them grounded. Resources, Walker explained. Mars was dying faster than they could reverse it. Earth was thriving but primitive. They made a choice, preserve what they could hear and send their genetic legacy to Earth, encoded in water molecules that would guide evolution toward beings who could eventually return and complete the work. So we're their descendants and their salvation, Rivera mused. And they're ours, Chen added, approaching with data readings. The atmospheric changes here are already creating a feedback loop that's stabilizing Earth's climate. 2 planets in balance, just as they planned. Back on Earth, in the small Wisconsin town where it all began, Lily Walker stood on the porch of her grandparents' house, gazing up at the night sky. Mars shone brightly, no longer just a red dot but now visible as a small disk to her enhanced vision. Somewhere up there, her father was helping build humanity's second home. Her phone buzzed with a video call notification. Accepting it, she found herself looking at her father's face, the silvery patterns beneath his skin catching the Martian sunlight. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Walker said, his smile warm despite the distance. 17 years old. When I was your age, I thought being an astronaut was the most exciting future possible. I couldn't have imagined this. Lily laughed. No one could have. The history books are being rewritten daily. Speaking of history, Walker said, his expression growing more serious. There's something I want to show you. The camera panned to reveal a vast chamber filled with what appeared to be suspended animation pods, thousands of them extending into the distance. What am I looking at, Dad? Lily asked, her breath catching. They're not all gone, Lily. The ancient ones, some of them survived, preserved in these chambers. We've revived the first one yesterday. They're awakening to find their plan succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. Lily's hand trembled as she held the phone. What are they like? Wise. Familiar, somehow. They look at us the way grandparents look at children who've grown in their absence, proud and a little surprised. Walker's voice filled with emotion. They're waiting to meet us, all of us. To welcome us home and to show us what comes next. In Nevada, in the same underground facility where she had first grasped the truth about the Martian discovery, Elena stood before a global council. Representatives from every nation watched as she presented the star map Thompson had entrusted her to explain. We've confirmed that the ancient civilization didn't just settle on Mars and Earth, she announced. They explored much of our galaxy. These 12 stars mark worlds where they established outposts similar to Mars, each one with preserved knowledge and infrastructure waiting to be reactivated. You're suggesting interstellar travel, the German chancellor said incredulously. That's beyond even our enhanced capabilities. Elena smiled. For now. But the knowledge to achieve it exists in the Martian archives. The ancient ones mapped the paths between stars. They're offering us not just our past, but our future, a road map to the cosmos. As the council erupted in excited discussion, Elena stepped away, her thoughts connecting with Walker across the gulf between worlds. They shared a moment of quiet understanding. What had begun as a shocking discovery of water on Mars had revealed something far more profound. Humanity had never been alone, and its story was far from finished. The stars awaited. And this time, they would journey together.